Hello, friends, and welcome back to Kirby Russia. You know the man sitting next to me, Matt Ehret, has agreed to come on the air, almost in a little bit of an emergency session, to finally talk about the Texas situation. But Matt, before I give you the floor and give you some questions here, I just wanted to mention something that, as someone who's worked in the media for a long time, every producer I've ever had always yells at me because I do everything impersonally. So I'm going to actually listen to my producer's advice and get a little bit personal here, Matt. One of the reasons why I want to talk about this episode, or this issue, and especially with you, is because this is the first time, after all these years of living in Russia, that I feel completely out of the loop of what's happening in America. Because in the past, before I got blocked for life on Facebook, I always could sort of see what was happening in America and see like a big, wide range of opinions from all the people I know and the people they know and all that stuff. And then I lost Facebook. And then I still was able to kind of really latch onto this through a lot of the people I know. But, dude, when you live here and with all the stuff that's happening with the war, I am so, blocked. I'll put it this way. The name Tucker Carlson has taken over my life over, the last 2 months. You know what I mean? So I feel bad. I feel it's for the first time I feel like I've truly lost America. So there you go. So, producers, I hope you're happy. Okay, so Matt, besides my emotions here, could you fill me in then, personally? What is actually happening in Texas? It looks like the governor wants to protect the border. The federal government doesn't, I guess. I see there's a river, the Rio Grande, I assume, and I see crates, and they're putting razor wire on top of, not crates, shipping containers. And there's razor wire on top of shipping containers. Is that really modern fortifications for the 21st century? What is this?
Yeah, man. No, look, I what I will do, and I'm a Canadian, right? So it's kind of an irony that I'm speaking to an American in Russia, and I'm a Canadian. But we all really have a vested interest in the United States that we love not collapsing and going into some hellish dark age.
Yes,
that's something we both hope very deeply in. And so, what I'm going to try to do, I'm not on the ground in Texas. So I'm also inferring things based on my studies of history, my studies of intelligence operations, and just trying to triangulate and piece things together, as so many of us are.
Okay.
What I can say is that this is not something I anticipated it. When we were celebrating, when New Year's was happening. I wasn't going to guess. I couldn't have guessed that there was going to be some sort of an inflamed showdown between the red states and the federal government over this issue of all issues. I didn't think it was going to come to a head as fast as it seems to be.
Yeah.
This really started on January 16th in a big way as a watershed moment. I mean, this has obviously been, it's not like there wasn't an immigration crisis last year, 2 years ago, 3 years ago. We do obviously have an agenda by the types of agencies that people like George Soros, Mark Malloch Brown represent and work for. And we see their effort as part of a long-standing objective, which is true, to undermine the institution of the sovereign nation state, which does have an important cultural element, by encouraging unlimited flows of immigration into countries of Europe, into the United States, into Canada. It's part and parcel of the operation, but it's not new. It's been a problem for a long time.
Well, yeah,
so
especially when it comes to immigration, everyone always mentions Ronald Reagan and his policies, and that's when I was a baby. So,
yeah. So yeah, this is not. So my question, and because I'm always looking for anomalies, what doesn't fit a mainstream script or a big narrative that I'm supposed to take on, that all of the media is sort of framing on all positions of an issue, right? There's certain controlled narratives on all sides for and against, which often break down when confronted with what can be known about reality itself. And so one thing is, why now? Why would Governor Abbott pick this moment to pick this fight, which has obviously sent shockwaves? 25, 26 states have lent their support. I think Florida has sent 1,000 National Guardsmen to assist Abbott in his decision to do something about the border crisis, which is a very porous thing. I mean, millions of people have slipped through undetected, which is an issue. It's been going on for a long time again, but now it's inflaming, and now we're hearing rhetoric of the need to, if the federal government is brought in, that this could become a hot issue. Maybe even something kinetic could spring out of it, as Abbott himself even alluded to in a recent speech. But I saw your finger as
Yeah, I
indicating.
just want to say what's changed. Oh, I'm thinking there's sort of two things. There's war in Ukraine changing directions. It's everyone knows it's over and the Russians won, and election year.
Yeah, those are factors. Those are big factors.
Ooh, but
And
you say
that's
that as if it's something else. Ooh.
well, no,
Don't
well,
tell.
I do think that if you really did care, as Abbott does, about reclaiming the nation and really doing something about this deep state that has latched on and infiltrated the federal government over many, many years, why would you not wait 10 and a half months for the actual elections to happen and devote your resources to ensuring that Donald Trump and the MAGA sort of branch of the non-neocon Republicans, which Abbott professes himself to be a part of, why wouldn't you put all of your effort into reclaiming the nation and instead pick now, 10 months away from this election, to pick this fight the way you are that could easily devolve quickly into civil war? And we're obviously seeing a lot of like messaging from Hollywood films regarding like Civil War in America. You know, a new film is coming out, very predictive programming, smelliness. Utilizing a lot of these scenarios. So one thing that caught my eye, and I don't think Abbott is necessarily in on it. I don't think he's an ill-intended character, nor do I think many of the governors of many of the red states who have lent their support are necessarily in on some broad conspiracy to bring about a civil war. However, I think that there are agencies touching upon the FBI, which I've noticed is very active in this story, that a lot of people just completely ignore, whether on the left or the right side. They just ignore the fact that all of this is happening because a letter was made public on January 15th or 14th, produced by 10 former FBI agents, and warning of infiltration of terrorists across the Texas border into America that will be at the heart of major terrorist events inside of America. Now, these are not just low-level FBI agents. These are people like Kevin Brooke, he's the former assistant director for intelligence of the FBI, an appointee of Robert Mueller, who is the #1 signer on that letter. You have Chris Zwecker, who is the former assistant director of criminal investigations for the FBI between 2004 2006, another Robert Mueller appointee. William Gavin, the chief investigator into the 1993 World Trade Center bombing, which books have been written about this. I've written essays about this. This is very provably an inside job, false flag in 1993.
Yeah.
And even the New York Times at the time had published the recordings of one of the FBI informants who was disturbed by the fact that his handler was allowing him to continue to transmit and pass on bomb making details, information, instructions, blueprints on the whole World Trade Center bombing. Ahmed Saleh, I think his name was. He was a former Egyptian intelligence officer who was brought in to, I think he was tied to the Muslim Brotherhood, but he was brought in to become a handler of the cell that carried out the bombing. And he was so disturbed that nothing was being done, as he was told, like, you're just going to be playing this scenario out, and then the FBI will sweep in and save the day. Nothing was done, and so this guy was smart enough to secretly record his conversations with his FBI handler. And then after the bombing, when people had died and things were moving faster, he then made it public, and whoever was at the New York Times decided to publish that. Probably very different management from what we have today.
Yeah.
But that being said, this guy, William Gavin, was the guy who covered it up. And so he's another signer on this list of 10 FBI operatives. He also resigned in shame because he was so blatant in his attempts to cover this thing up. And by the way, as a side note, the consequence of the 1993 bombing resulted in Joe Biden's authoring of his omnibus anti-terror bill, which became, as John Ashcroft said in 2001, the basis verbatim of the Patriot Act that was brought online after World Trade Center bombing number 2.
Okay. So what you're saying is, in general, the guys who are sort of released this, they're the exact type of people who organize bad stuff behind the scenes.
Yeah, they know exactly what causes terrorism, and it has nothing to do with renegade freedom haters coming in across porous American borders. This is every single case that I've ever looked at, and that even you've had Fordham University law studies back in 2013 that analyzed forensically every single case of prevented terrorist acts in American soil over the course of 1999 to 2012, and in every single case they found the hand of the FBI, not just informants but guiders, handlers, planners from the top, and this includes the Newburgh 4 bombing attempt, or planners of terrorism. You had the Christmas tree bomber, in Portland, Oregon. Even more recently, we've had, as was recently discovered, it's the case of the attempted kidnapping of Governor Whitmer, of which 12 of the 16 operatives of that cell were all FBI. Jacob Sutton.
No, hold on, man. Maybe we could say this if we were going to say this from some sort of like a devil's advocate position, that maybe the FBI spends so much time and resources trying to catch this type of person that they actually kind of like the memes on 4chan or whatever. They actually kind of just have people like being involved in, like, you know what I mean? They're kind of like chasing ghosts. But if you chase ghosts by wearing a white blanket with the eyes cut out and going boo, then you trick people into thinking you're one of the ghosts. It's kind of that logic, like a self-fulfilling prophecy, kind of, in a goofy way. Yeah. Or is that devil's advocacy flawed, and this is actually something very understood and well known?
Yeah, I think the devil doesn't need advocates at this point. He's got his own law team already. Yeah, no, maybe some people do kind of like live into it on some level, perhaps. I'm open to that, where people like just make their entire career based on stopping terrorism, to the point that they feel that they have to create instances of terrorism in order to validate why they're keeping their jobs, maybe on some level. But I think that on a higher level, I mean, it all comes down to your willful or your unwillful participants within a broader conspiracy to turn the USA into a slave state based on paranoia and fear of threats created from abroad coming to press upon you, and whether that's the very existence of terrorism, Islamist terrorism from Al Qaeda and ISIS and onward. It was all created by the CIA anyway back in the late 70s and early 80s when we were doing Operation Cyclone, pouring in $500 million into radicalizing madrasas as part of the Zbigniew Brzezinski scheme, to enmesh the Soviet Union in their own Vietnam. So the whole thing itself, you could have said, well, after the Soviet Union disintegrated willfully, did not the whole mandate, or should we not?
Once that grant money starts flowing, everyone wants to keep the grants coming.
Exactly. Well, that's the thing, right? Because that's the thing. So you could have said, well, then we should have probably stopped funding and utilizing Al Qaeda as an instrument of Western intelligence. But it's like, no, at that point, there's so much machinery, billions of dollars flowing into the thing. It has a life of its own almost. And it's still useful. Ultimately, those who gamed out this thing back in the 70s. It's not like they haven't wanted to destroy Russia and China and Iran as part of their broader, or one of the necessary things to do along the list to get to this imagined state of a utopian world government of a depopulated humanity. There are these obstructions that have to be dealt with. So they've always had a desire to keep in their tool basket the Islamist terrorist cards that could be then used as we saw it being used in the post 9/11 age anyway. But now they've extended that more, and like I said, this is the Biden. The Patriot Act, which has now turned into Patriot Act 2, and it's been renewed every single year for the past 23 years. It's been constantly renewed. So we've been in a constant state of emergency, justifying anti-constitutional obstructions of people's civil liberties, the detaining of people without charge. Things like Guantanamo Bay have been maybe slightly disassembled, but not really. There's still a lot of political.
I don't know about that. Ever so slightly.
Ever so slightly. So all of this has been justified by the idea that we're doing things for the sake of a national emergency. It wasn't just the pandemic thing that justified it. It's this was already before that pandemic excuse. And again, Biden's omnibus bill, which was shut down in 1985 when it was first attempted, was used by John Ashcroft and Cheney verbatim for that, and now they're trying to extend it even to domestic terrorists as well. People who are conspiracy theorists is what they're saying is one of the attributes of a domestic terrorist. So if you notice your neighbor engaged in conspiracy theories or doubting the government, which is another sign of potential domestic terrorists, then you should call the authorities or at least whatever. So you've got this whole McCarthyite paranoia thing also being added onto this. So yeah, I think we're being played, and the Civil War danger is something I'm very, very concerned about.
Okay, but again, so the thing is, I don't understand then like with Texas. So is it sort of like, okay, so basically now both like the sides of the uniparty acknowledge that there's a border problem, which means that at some point in the near future there could be a terrorist something or other that gets blamed on the border crisis, and then we can use that as some excuse that, oh no, now we've just woken up and there are really millions of people in America, we don't know who they are. There's a terrorist on every corner. Is that where this is going?
Yeah, well, I think that different people will be told different things based on their profile. Obviously, if this is permitted to run its course, it strikes me that on the one hand, most of the Democrats have been fed so much propaganda and narratives that have portrayed all sort of MAGA conservatives as Putin stooges, and part of the Putin secret army of useful idiots embedded throughout the United States.
The Putin fifth column.
Yeah, and meanwhile, all of the Republicans have been profiled and are being played like violins to see that all of the immigrants are being channeled in by the Chinese, the CPC, which is stationed across the Darien Gap, and there's all of these allusions to what is China doing in Latin America. And there are obviously people like Tucker, Brett Weinstein, and many others have been. Michael Yon, a former Green Beret, very high-level military intelligence operative, have been part of this whole Falun Gong operation, which is catered more to the conservative psyche, to paint everybody who is causing their economic woes, their problems, as being Chinese agents. Biden is a Chinese agent, Trudeau, Chinese agent. So if there's going to be some sort of a terrorist act, then you can know that it's the Chinese at the end of the day, the CPC, godless commies who hate our freedoms, who actually are at the heart of everything. Yeah. So in all cases, whether you're a Democrat or whether you're a Republican, when bad things happen, you have been so hypnotized with specifically catered narratives to your psych profile that you will hate either Putin or Xi Jinping, who are themselves actually best friends and brothers in arms right now, like fighting for humanity together with unbreakable like friendship, which has allowed for a serious battle against the oligarchy to even occur in the first place. And you'll just completely miss, well, what is George Soros? What is Mark Malloch Brown? What is this deep state that's tied to, this financier oligarchy embedded not within China or Russia or Iran or Venezuela? It's specifically this old black nobility family. And I'm not talking about Shaka Zulu or African nobility. I'm talking about the European bloodlines that ran the British Empire, that never disassembled themselves, that still run the Skull and Bones, the different secret societies that created our intelligence agencies, that are at the heart of every single false flag, from the murder of JFK, not even false flag, but every single thing that was done to us negatively, from JFK's murder and his brother to the Gulf of Tonkin, which was another inside job run in the early 60s. It's always been this oligarchy that we're not looking at properly because we're so desirous of having a hate image of something other than what would otherwise be our responsibility to do something about it. Because if it's the other, we don't have a responsibility to do much about the Chinese Communist Party or the Kremlin.
It's an outside force. Yeah.
We could just complain about it and have a tribal sort of like bond that we all share of our common paranoia of the other trying to get into our gates.
Here's something.
The problem is the enemy is already in our gates, and it's not caused by this other thing we hate.
Well, here's a question. To what extent do you think the Russians or the Chinese understand all this? And to what extent are they sort of immune from it?
It's a good question. They've definitely done a much better job at dealing with their deep state operations than we have. China is probably in the best place as far as like having carried out the most effective battle systematically against their deep state. Both, because I mean, a big problem of The Chinese deep state, as far as I can understand it, seems to have emerged or became very virulent during the Opium Wars, which was it's part of the Century of Humiliation, right? Where the British Empire successfully totally crushed China, brought them from the most economically advanced society in the early 1800s to becoming the most enslaved, opium-ridden, drug-filled. But it also relied upon creating a sort of upper caste system of certain local families. Some of the families were already there in influential positions and were told, hey, we will give you privileges if you become local controllers, with operating bases out of Shanghai and Hong Kong and Guangdong, but mostly Hong Kong and Shanghai, which is where HSBC emerged out of. And just by giving your loyalty, and it did involve things like the Green Gang that worked very closely with Chiang Kai-shek later on. These were various Asian Taoist, Freemasonic cults that were created and interfaced with the older or slightly different Western Freemasonic outfits that Britain was already utilizing, that came in after the Renaissance into Britain and transformed Britain from being a legitimate nation as England was into an empire. The Rosicrucian movement was a big part of that occult intelligence network that did that. And so that became sort of the expression or the instrument. And we had sort of examples of that in China. We had examples of that in India, that were also built up around the higher Brahmin castes that were loyal to the British Empire, so that you didn't have to have too much physical input by Britain, because they had, for every one British soldier, like 100 members of the Indian oligarchy who were willing to do the work with their own.
Yeah, as long as they have the control of the top of the caste system, everything kind of works out in the long run.
Yeah, exactly. And then you have these nice organized crime systems that you build up and you cultivate, that make the drug cultivation, the opium running, the bribes all much more convenient. Yeah. They had the Sicilian and the Corsican mafia built up around Lord Palmerston, Giuseppe Mazzini back in the 19th century, that were built up through the P1 Lodge, the P1 Freemasonic Lodge in Italy, that then just grew this thing, groomed it, inserted it into America increasingly before Prohibition, and during and after it really grew. And the Jewish mafia groupings around the Bronfmans and Mayor Lansky were also part of the same. And you'll find that at the higher echelons, you'll have a Kabbalistic Gnostic sort of religious order within these structures that masquerade on an outward, like, exoteric form as being like Jewish or Christian. Like the Italian mafia is Christian, yeah, right. And the Jewish mafia is Jewish, yeah, right. I mean, at the end of the day, these are pedophilia networks of Satanists masked with outward veneer, catered to whatever part of the world they're going to be interfacing with.
Yeah.
But they did the same thing with China. So China did battle over especially, I think, the Mao's ability to keep the upper hand, did quite a bit to extract a big chunk of this from an operating system in China, and he did quite a bit to break China free of British controls over the Chinese economy. A lot of these groupings that managed the drug running throughout the Cold War, on behalf of the CIA and the Flying Tigers. I'm talking about Chiang Kai-shek and the Chinese fascist network that became like sold to the West as pro-American, pro-liberty, democratic patriots of Taiwan. And there are Kuomintang as well in Laos and Cambodia that maintained the what's called the Golden Triangle, that brought in the drugs, heroin throughout the 50s, 60s, 70s into North America from Vancouver. That was part of the whole operation. So China's had to do, you've had a battle of the two Chinas, and there's moments of punctuation where things really come to a head. And I found one of the big points was when Soros's operative Zhao Ziyang, who became, governor general of the Chinese Communist Party, the highest position you can have in China. That was a guy, Zhao Ziyang, co-ran a think tank, an open society think tank with George Soros, and he was the head of the Chinese government from 1987 to 89. And before that, he was sold to the West as the Gorbachev of China, because he was going to do.
I heard something about that. I don't think I heard it from you, but from someone else. Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah. Yeah, so why did he fail, right? And why did Soros get kicked out? I made a whole my wife and I made a documentary on it because it's so important as a good paradox for people to think about. Like, how did the Chinese manage to ban George Soros and imprison his operative, who was the Chinese the governor general of the Chinese Communist Party, right? That high was put into, stripped of all of his powers, given house arrest. He wasn't allowed to leave his house till he died 16 years later. All of his lieutenants either went to jail in 1989 or they escaped through Project Yellowbird, Operation Yellowbird. It was a racist name given to a project to take a bunch of...
it's yellow in that sense. Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
Who knows? Maybe there were just a lot of canaries in China or something. I don't know. So
yeah, well, they were afraid they were going to sing like canaries if they were captured, so they wanted to get them out of China through Hong Kong. And the triads were working with MI6 and CIA, and there's a Wikipedia page on this even. I mean, it is like official, accessible information. And from Hong Kong, organized by the U.S. Embassy and the British, they were brought into Vancouver, into New York. They were given protection. They became what was known as like sort of a foreign, that became the organizing force of the Chinese deep state outside of China.
While we're on the topic, I kind of want to bring this up where there's something baffling is people have kind of asked me about the Freemasons in Russia. And if you go back to like Peter the Great, sorry, I shouldn't say that. Peter the First, because he's not the Great in Russian. He's only the first. Peter the First's time and some of the leaders in the 1700s, you can see some remnants of like the all-seeing eye and some Masonic stuff on some of the things they built, be they churches or normal buildings or whatever. Time marches on. Here comes communism. After communism, like a few rounds ago, the head of the Masonic Church here actually ran against Putin. It's just he was extremely unpopular, so he got like 2% of the vote or something. And I checked in on this guy, and I think he's trying to run against Putin again, but he has no money. And the Masonic Lodge in Russia closed because of COVID, killed its membership. So that's something that I think is absolutely bizarre. Because remember, that's like the Masons are like behind everything. In Russia, they can't keep up membership. What is that about? Or did someone crack down on it? Because they did crack down on the Scientologists.
They did? Really? Good.
Yeah, the Scientologists. But this was actually, it was after the Maidan, but before the war. Because, dude, if we want to talk about social changes, the war has opened up, the Overton window has moved very far in what is happening now. But before that, there used to be a Scientology center that was very noticeable in a place called Taganskaya Square, which is a very prominent place in Moscow that people go by all the time. And one day they just went in and sacked it. And all of a sudden it was an office building.
Cool. That's cool. And this happened right after the Maidan?
Somewhere around there, yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, like, good. I like hearing that. No, the Scientologists, just for those who might be listening to this wondering like, why am I taking such satisfaction out of that? And I mean, this is an Aleister Crowley cult. It's a UFO Aleister Crowley occult satanic operation that was synthetically created as a spin-off of the Ordo Templi Orientis, and L. Ron Hubbard was a disciple of Crowley who himself gave interviews, and his son, who defected from the Scientologists, even gave an interview to Penthouse magazine, professing that all I knew growing up in the household was Satanism and black magic, and so and it does overlap with the Falun Gong. So just like I was making the point that a big part of the Chinese effort to deal with its deep state was also to deal with the Falun Gong operation, which was a synthetic cult that sort of it's a bit of a mystery.
I think the cult is still a problem for them. I think there's still some remnants of that left, or no?
Nah, not really. Not in the mainland. There's a lot of activity in Taiwan, which has a lot more autonomy. But not on the mainland, no. But the cult was like the founder of the cult is today living as a billionaire in a 400-acre estate in New York, Li Hongji, and like Li Hongji is clearly somebody who has been like he's like a Charles Manson type of MK Ultra figure who was like an insignificant teacher who had a big revelation. He thought he was channeling messages, a very, very theosophical sort of experience. You know, like I was channeling messages from ascended masters, that gave me this insight. And actually, these masters are aliens. And he gave an interview to Time magazine in 1999 describing how he himself is an intergalactic messiah fighting these dark forces that are dimensional aliens wanting to steal our bodily fluids.
But unlike the Theosophical Society, he's at least fighting evil. He's in Bizarro Land with them, but he's fighting evil. Usually the Theosophical Society is like, let the demons come into me, please.
Well, you've got, again, the exoteric and esoteric teachings in all of these sects. And on the surface, the Theosophists wouldn't have been successful if they just came out saying, by the way, let's feed the demon within, and by the way, we're all God, and God is evil. Like they wouldn't recruit, it wouldn't be successful. They have to give off this, we are brothers and sisters of light and goodness.
Oh, I see.
Much, right? But then there's this, at some point along the way, you then get, if you've got the right stuff, you get the higher teachings that are not.
And that's the whole Gnosticism thing, and the thing with the Scientology, because they also have their different layers, and at different levels you get then revealed the true secrets. And that's also why one of the things about Gnosticism is why it's evil, because Gnosticism always goes that way. It always goes into some dark cult, and whatever the secret is, it's never good. And any good guy religion would just tell people how to go to heaven, but no, you only have to do this, this, and this, especially these sexual acts, and then you get to find out the secret. Like, no. So the Gnostic approach is always just the worst. And I do, because I'm such a nutcase, I even see people do that in like a secular sense. It's hard to explain, but like you'll even see people be like, no, I don't want to tell him that. I want to keep it for myself, or maybe get something out of them. I don't know. I'm going off on a diatribe here. But anyways, we're getting deep into cults. So anyways, where is this Texas border thing like going?
Okay, hold on. Just to tie it up a little bit, because it's floating, but let's tie it. So the Scientology thing, part of the idea of going through the 8 layers of operating Thetan 1 to 8, and there might be layers above, it seems there are, is to purge yourself of the demons that you discover, the spirit demons or other intergalactic beings from some galactic federation 800 billion years in the past that have somehow found themselves and are part of the galaxy, that were all embedded into volcanoes and that got out of a volcano and that are now making up every single feeling you have, every attribute you have, every hope or whatever. Yeah. You're actually, what you come to discover is that you're made up of these billions and billions of foreign entities, and that by going through the various types of self-examination processes with usually inspectors who are more advanced overseeing your self-examination and examining you, utilizing these electromagnetic machines that are essentially just like lie detector tests, you're able to like shed and purge yourself to become your true self and purge yourself of these foreign demon forces. Very similar to the type of thing that people have been through and have defected from Li Hongji's experience, and just listening to Li Hongji himself from the Falun Gong describe as well something which is similar, that we're all made up of these foreign spirit, demon, alien beings that are sucking our fear energy, that are creating all of our psychological disorders, even to the point that he even says that they create scientific progress, which he says is a disorder. So these beings that created the Industrial Revolution caused us to become out of whack by creating scientific progress. So you've got already, right, just by virtue of that already, an assumed idea that healthy humanity is a static, non-scientific humanity. And so there's a sort of Zen Buddhist sort of underpinning to some of this stuff, which is why his thing became known as New Tang Dynasty. That's sort of the umbrella group that creates Epoch Times and all of the other thousands of other sub-organizations as part of New Tang Dynasty. And part of the New Tang Dynasty is to revive the most mystical Taoist Zen Buddhist attributes that first came online in the Tang Dynasty period. Not to say all Zen Buddhists are corrupt. I'm not saying that, but that's sort of the timber of it, but tied to an alien's effect. And that by going through the Qigong exercises to balance your Qi energy, the way he specifically says, not the way anybody else has said, because this has been practiced for thousands of years, but no, something about the way he's saying to do it, because he's the intergalactic messiah who's balancing all cosmic forces of good and evil in some Manichaean dualism that he's like the stabilizing force. Now you can yourself do like the Scientologists and find your true self, which will then give you the same powers that L. Ron Hubbard said he had, or that Li Hongji says he has, which is telepathic powers. You could travel the astral plane. You could be everywhere at once. You could detect people's past lives, future lives. You could now, like, you'll become a Superman, a Jedi.
Yeah.
So a lot of the, this is why I just found it so interesting that Putin cracked down successfully against this very Aleister Crowley malevolent operation, which is very much embedded with intelligence agencies. This is what China did when they expelled Li Hongji and his whole Falun Gong operation in 1999 or 98. Yeah. They were causing like a public disturbance in Beijing, basically threatening to shut down the government. They had, like, Li Hongji called for 30,000 of his followers to just like do civil disobedience and sit in rows and stuff. So it's like, on top of everything else, part of one of the things that they say about the organ harvesting, because that's the source of the organ harvesting that's repeated to Western media consumers a lot, is that's why China has been stealing specifically Falun Gong practitioners, and mostly it's just them, and it's like, why them so much? Yeah. And as Li Hongji has explained it, it's because our organs as Falun Gong practitioners are so tasty, because they're so in harmony with the golden section because of our Qigong practices, that the Chinese, which implicitly means aliens, who suck and want to devour our bodily fluids. It's all about bodily fluids for these people. That's also why they're all over the health freedom movement as well. You'll find that
the four humors, baby. That's old school. That's a lot of bodily fluid stuff. Yep. But anyway, sorry I got you off track.
No, but it makes it very, very self. It overdoes the. It's like the caricature of in the Stanley Kubrick movie. The How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb. You have that one character who's this general who's just like a paranoid conspiracy theorist to the extreme degree, worried about the commies wanting to steal our bodily fluids and what are they putting the fluoride into our water for and all this stuff. And it's sort of like, it's interesting that Stanley Kubrick's daughter is a high-level Scientologist as well, which is interesting, OT7, which also implies to me that there's probably something occult that Kubrick himself was a part of as far as predictive programming goes, because a lot of the Hollywood, entirety of Hollywood pretty much became an predictive programming, but also with a ritualistic, satanic religious component to it regarding the storylines that they would promote into the psyche. So I used to think maybe Kubrick was just a satirist or somebody warning us of things, but I'm starting to think more and more that I think he was very high level. All that to say, I think China and Russia have done a better job at dealing with their deep states than we have. The reason why I think, back to your question on Texas, how does this play into Texas? Well, Texas is the only hope that I see America surviving the coming storm is because of Trump being able to rally the patriotic, non-neocon American patriots from all branches of life into reclaiming the federal control of the nation, which is the only way to do battle with this thing. Is you got to use federal power to do things, especially to protect the people, but also offensively against the oligarchy, the way we see from China and Russia's example. That works, especially China, with its power over its economic base. So they want to destroy that before it can happen. And the last time that, when China was going through their opium wars, they were also at the same time going through a civil war in 1857, right? You had a civil war in China, and that was a civil war caused by a pseudo-Christian synthetic cult overseen by British and American Gnostic Christian missionaries who brainwashed this school teacher from a little village in the south of China to believe that he was the brother of Jesus. So he created this new, it was called the Taiping Heavenly Kingdom that he had declared to be the new kingdom of China. And there was a brutal 15-year civil war that he waged with his massive army that was receiving all sorts of logistical support, guns, supplies, other things from the British Empire, while the British were also fighting China externally as well to force more opium down their throats. And this was being done at the same time that Britain was organizing the Civil War in America by providing weapons, logistics, other forms of support, battleships to the Confederacy, which was another Freemasonic outfit set up through the Scottish Rite. And Albert Pike and Mazzini were in total collaboration and correspondence the whole time. Albert Pike was a Confederate general who founded the KKK, the first, domestic terrorist organization run by intelligence agencies was the KKK.
Yeah.
And this was sort of was brought online the same year that HSBC was being created. So, this empire is more than any one nation. It's more than Britain. It's a globally extended feudal death cult that has been trying to revive the old pagan mystery schools from the ancient times that, Christianity didn't help them out. They got really derailed when Christianity was brought online. And they've been trying to set the game plan or set the stage to revive and get their vengeance by either destroying Christianity completely by producing a culture of hedonism and immorality, or infiltrate it from within and take people who think of themselves as Christian but are now being influenced by Scientology and Falun Gong persuasions to infiltrate it and make, like what Tucker Carlson is promoting, for example, is this Gnostic Manichaean pseudo-Christianity that presumes that, inside of the injections that so many people were given is Luciferian fluids that have been injecting demon forces into our bodies that are now like channeling dark forces of dark evil energy through our DNA. And so they've got people into this like cosmic schizophrenia where now we're being told that, we've got demon forces that have been injected. Everybody who's been given an injection of the mRNA thing have now received demonic entities. And so they're bringing people into a state where they're inducing multiple split personalities like they do for the Scientology and Falun Gong practitioners, but they're doing it on a more broad level. And again,
I really like how you're saying how it sort of unites them around this foreign entity invasion. Seems to really unite all this stuff into one, which is interesting.
Yes. And it's all Gnostic Manichaeanism, but more than that, it's a Hermetic variation of a syncretization of a variety of the same thing.
But then regardless, so again, back to then the border. We've covered this. Where are we going with this whole border thing? Is this just some kind of dog and pony show for the moment, or is this some sort of Trumpian experiment to an extent to kind of see what happens? Or...
No, it's to destroy Trump's base, to basically induce Trump's base to entrap them into a fight that will undermine a lot of future fights that should otherwise be happening to take back the nation. And instead, everyone's going to get enmeshed in this very controlled thing that could easily spiral into a all-out kinetic conflict with federal authorities.
But the one thing is, Matt, then this is one thing I've tried to talk about on my channel is like, when people talk about, let's just say the Freemasons and all this other stuff, right? They're like, well, it originally started in Europe and then it moved over to London because they had the printing press, and then things got much better in America, so they moved over to there. It's a much smaller world than it is now. If they destroy the United States, where would those people go?
Well, the plan has always been to destroy the United States. They're trying to do what they failed to do in the 1860s, which was supposed to be very different. So in the 1860s, the idea was that the U.S. was supposed to dissolve into two separate entities that would both have new there'd be two confederacies in northern that would merge with the northern states with Canada, British Canada. That would be a new country with a special relationship with Britain, run by the northern branch of the Scottish Rite, which is where all of the transcendentalists, the spiritualists, the people who were seeding the Mormons and stuff from Britain were all sort of based in the north. And in the south was supposed to be a new confederacy that would have slaves, would have an imperial ambition, that would itself actually have an empire that would be tied to Cuba originally. And that's what William Walker, the pirate, was assigned to go and take control of Cuba, or not Cuba, sorry, Nicaragua, or is it Venezuela? I think it was Nicaragua. And he was declared dictator. But part of that was to get in and control Cuba as the center of a new capital of what the Knights of the Golden Circle of Albert Pike had called, before the KKK, it was the Knights of the Golden Circle.
But what would that ultimately accomplish, dividing the United States into two mega nations?
Because they would be two slave nations, one being a Confederate slave power that would be loyal to Britain, because Britain still controlled the purse strings. They controlled 80%. The entire slave economy was based upon cotton exports, and 80% of the cotton exports were purchased by London. And so London had to control the manufacturing, not the South. So the South was totally dependent on London, also for their balance of trade. London, the pound sterling was still the basis of global currency, like the U.S. dollar became after World War II. That's what the British pound was. So it was part of the, and by the way, the part of the cybernetic system back in the 1800s was that London would, how did they get the monopoly over textiles, was by cutting off the hands of all of the Indian textile workers that had formerly been the #1 textile manufacturing hub of the world before the British totally subdued them, and crushed their mills, their factories, and only allowed them to grow opium. So India was growing the opium. Soon Turkey and Iran would join suit, especially Iran under the control of the British in the 1880s. And that was when the British took control of the Suez. So then that zone became the opium producing zone, and then that opium was then sent to primarily to go to China, to destroy China's psycho-spiritual vitality, to keep them subdued and keep a local crime syndicate in power in China, so that they could be then exploited by the British Empire. And the cotton for the textiles would come in from the southern United States, and the families that made the most money, the Cabots, the Lowells, the Morgans, like all of the leading families, the Astors of America, that were sort of the junior branch of the British Empire, were given their fortunes by being allowed in on the opium game from the First and Second Opium Wars, as well as the slave trade. So they didn't really produce an economy, they just produced crime and graft and speculation. So they were always junior partners loyal to the higher agencies that they were never allowed to marry up into, and would be granted local jurisdictional control over the world. Like Hitler was promised local jurisdictional control, by his patrons at the City of London, the Bank of England, Wall Street. That said, okay, when we divvy up the world, you'll get Russia. That'll be your slave colony and a big chunk of Europe. Britain will get India and a big chunk of Europe, and Italy will get this chunk of Africa, and the world, and Japan is going to get China and a big chunk of Asia, and Britain and their American counterparts who were trying to kill Roosevelt, they're going to control the Americas. And so that was the idea of like the evil form of the multipolar system of controls, right? You just have like
the anti-multipolar world.
Yeah, the doppelganger thing. But it was never based on cooperation or the idea that all men are created in the image of some creator of something. Like that was not permitted into the equation. So that's what the Confederacy was promised, would be to be granted a controlling dominion within like Latin America as part of their, and eventually it probably was destined to take control of all of the Americas at some point. You couldn't get around that. The North again was supposed to be under the control of the northern branch of the Scottish Rite. And here's the other thing that's of interest regarding the Freemasonic fight, is that before the 1850s, that was the end point of, you've heard about the Anti-Masonic Party of America?
No, actually, it's news to me.
Okay, there was something called the it's a pretty good book. So John Quincy Adams had a series of lectures with Charles Francis Adams, his grandson, on letters and addresses on Freemasonry. Now, John Quincy Adams got swept up into this populist war on Freemasonic lodges starting in the 1820s. And for about 25 years, it was impossible to operate in most Freemasonic lodges in America very easily. And there were literally hundreds of different lodges. Yeah. There was not like one Freemasonic lodge. Like this lodge means that, you had Martinist Masonry, you had York Rite Masonry, Scottish Rite, you got so many, the French Oriental Lodge, but there's sub-lodges and so many different and they're not all equal, right? And so you had a lot of the best Americans from George Washington and Lafayette, who was French, but whatever, all the way to Henry Clay, a leading ally of Lincoln and protectionist, they were Freemasons, but they were also at war with other Freemasonic lodges, like I was mentioning Albert Pike's and the Scottish Rite. Yeah. Now, with something was cooked up by the Mormons. The Mormons are kind of like a proto-Scientology alien cult masquerading in a Christian veneer that was seeded into America back in the late 1820s. They had their own weird, Gnostic interpret or cosmology as well of forces of darkness and light. And by the way, Lucifer's...
Well, ultimately, they have the thing of the every one of us can become a god thing. That is your key Satanist point number one. Of course you can
Yeah,
become a
exactly.
god. All
Yeah,
you have to do is remove all the restraints around you. You know, the classic.
eventually you get to that. Yeah, and
Yeah.
most people in the Mormons don't even get to that place. Like they don't get to be part of the inner elect. They're just probably nice people who don't freaking know what's going on.
Yeah.
But that's all I have to say. The Mormons play a role in the anti-Masonic movement. So what happens is there's this guy William Morgan, who's supposedly a Grand Master, who's gonna. Fact is, there's no evidence that he was ever a Grand Master of any Masonic lodge, but he comes out saying, "I'm a Grand Master of the Masonic Lodge, and I'm gonna write a book." Now, his reputation up until that point was a snake oil salesman
Mm-hmm.
and a philanderer. But all of a sudden, he's like, "I'm going to write a book exposing the secrets of the Masons," and he made a really loud statement, and all of the press were covering it. What's his book going to be? What's his book going to be about? And so he was a hype. A hype was created very, very easily, and then all of a sudden, right before his book is going to be published, he disappears. And everyone says, okay, he's obviously been killed by the Masons for showcasing what their rites of initiation are. Now, you read his book eventually does get published. There's nothing all that revelatory in it, all that to say, but his body is never found.
Wow.
So the question is, did he actually die? But who knows? I'm going to say something about that. But first, the effects in 1826 of this propaganda is the anti-Masonic movement. Lodges are stormed, ransacked, everything's shut down. And it goes on for about 18 or so years. And then the one lodge that really comes out intact and dominant, which Albert Pike later on talks about what a great experience this was, is the Scottish Rite. Nothing else. All of the other lodges are shut down. They don't come back. The Scottish Rite becomes the only thing that survives. Now, here's the weird thing. This guy, William Morgan, he had a wife. His wife, as soon as he disappears, goes off to the Mormon compound and becomes one of the wives of Joseph Smith. That's the first thing that this guy's wife does. Of all the guys in America to go to, you go to Joseph Smith.
She goes and finds Joseph Smith.
Huh?
She goes and finds Joseph Smith. That's
crazy.
Yeah,
and he's like, yeah, you're the one. You're going to be in my harem. And so that means you get a planet. So and then in 1845 or 46, like 20 years after this guy William Morgan is supposed to have died, all of a sudden the Mormons do a reverse baptism. So in the Mormon church, when you die, certain people get a baptism once they've died, not when they're born or when they're babies. And that implies that this guy would have lived an additional 20 years in some Mormon like cult compound, right? And then was given a death baptism ceremony afterwards. So that's another weird thing. But the thing that's really important is that there was a purge. All of the more like patriotic networks of like good Christians and humanists who were operating through the Masonic lodges as part of the practical necessities of carrying out secrecy because secrecy is both good or bad.
Depends how you use it.
Exactly. And sometimes lodges are very useful to maintain secrecy, to make sure you could trust the people that you're building a plan with, that at least you have a better chance of gauging whether you could trust them or not. Because there's no internet, there's no encrypted emailing services back in those days. It's really hard to do organization, especially that's going to involve networking in a coherent way with other people in in Europe, like that was needed for the American Revolution, or in Russia with Catherine, the Great helping out with the Americans. That required a lot of coordination with no telephones and no internet. So again, the lodges were useful, but then again, you always see these battles, like where in Russia you've had, so first thing, the Scottish Rite was set up by a British loyalist, actually a British general named Augustine Prevost in 1801 that ran a secret policing operation from Charlottetown. And then that's where the origins of the Scottish Rite itself came from. And then you had, again, like I said, a northern branch that Ralph Waldo Emerson and other British puppets, like that ran the Transcendentalists, the Spiritualists that created the Abolitionists, or the most terrorist-oriented branches of the Abolitionists, like John Brown, the guy who shot up Harper's Ferry. He was like a puppet for the northern abolitionist branch of people like William Lloyd Garrison, who himself was part of the Cabot family operation, which was always working in cahoots with their slave power cousins down south, but acting like they were against slavery. But it was all to create these unbridgeable tensions where you have both the Confederate slave power engaged in domestic terrorism, while at the same time you have northern anti-slave powers doing terrorism, all controlled by the same
So
entity.
that's where we could be going.
Yeah, and you have it with
Oh.
Antifa on the left, right? We see it with the eco-terrorist groups that are like, thinking that it's their duty to Mother Gaia to declare war on pipelines and
About the pipelines, well, that's one thing. But
or
so far with those
transgender kids
the
for
eco
shooting up
terrorists, they generally don't actually do anything other than ruin historical objects. They don't actually really terrorize, as in annoy. You know.
No, it's bad because you got things like you got the stupid things we see from these brats in museums
Yeah,
or like
that's
sitting
what I
on.
mean.
Yeah, no, that's the baby stuff. But you actually have things like Deep Green Resistance, which is much more kinetic.
Nice.
And these are groups that have their own website where they actually showcase all of their trophies of, somebody blew up a pipeline here, somebody blew up an electrical line here, somebody derailed the train here. This is what they were using, and this is the date and location, and this is how you can do it too. And so they actually have a whole thing where they're trying to recruit these young useful idiots from from certain radicalizing university experiences. They bring them into training camps in the forest and back to nature, experiences. They probably tie in some drugs and orgy in there too, like they did for the Nazis.
Of course, there's sex involved. Of course.
Yeah. Well, there's a movie that's called How to Blow Up a Pipeline that was just produced by Hollywood as part of a recruitment tool. And there's a lot of sex and misanthropy in there, just like the Wundervogels that of the Nazi SS leadership in the 1912-1913 period. They were doing their nature walks in the Black Forest, doing kumbaya around a campfire and little orgies and stuff to get back to the Odin gods of Gaia. But that's a thing all over like Vancouver and Victoria and BC and down into Colorado. There's all these like groups that have been cultivated as part of the underground, working in harmony with the above grounders like Mark Carney and other eco bankers on the, operating through Davos. But so you got the above grounders and then the below grounders, and they work together, and they have a manifesto about this on their websites. But then inversely, then they're trying to also radicalize the rights in the way that we've seen with the FBI funding of, what's called the Temple of Blood cult, which is like this pro-Trump cult that hates immigrants, but the guy who founded it is openly, or he was caught receiving FBI money, like $180,000 just in 2018. Of course. So they want
something that's already sort of out of the limelight, but everyone who was involved in BLM at a high level, they all have mansions, and they've all gotten busted. Well, busted, but they've paid no consequences. They've all gotten big paychecks for that, so.
Yeah. No, exactly. Yeah, it's complete hypocrisy. And then you got the LGBTQX branch as well that we've seen shoot up certain schools, Christian schools.
Here's one thing, Matt. So I want to, because I know you have to get going. We're at the hour mark, and I know you plan your day by hours, much the same way that I do. So, real quick question: if if something really majorly changes, will we ever be able to live in a world that doesn't have, or at least the satanic nonsense becomes weird people in their basement and not something that like the rich, wealthy elite do? Or is this something that we're just going to be eternally cursed with? That even if let's just say the U.S. establishment thinks it can be cute, causes a civil war, destroys itself. Will this just happen then in Beijing? Sorry, I'm showing my age.
Well, hey, look, I think that birds are made to fly, and it takes a while for the bird after it hatches to learn how to fly. It doesn't happen right away, and humans are made to walk, and we sometimes we have to fall quite a bit before we figure it out and learn how to live in this new world of walking and balancing as a new sense of the five senses we were born with. So we add senses as we learn: the sense of balance, the sense of harmony, the sense of these senses, though, come with age and wisdom over time, and there's no...
Uh-oh. Matt, no, the connection was lost. So anyways, guys, oh, no, Matt, you're back. Okay.
All right, yeah. So just to finish that little analogy, that's how I tend to see humanity. My philosophy is to sort of see us as as an sort of like in an organic way that I look at oligarchism as like an infantile state ultimately of the human condition, of these, when you're a baby, you think the whole world revolves around you. When you start that sense that there's other and then there's me, and everything is being done to like cater to me. And it takes a while to learn that there is a world outside of you and other humans that are not you, and you're gonna die, and to come to terms with your mortality and to reframe what you think the purpose of your identity is, knowing that you now know you're gonna die like everybody does. So the oligarchy, it's like they've been running away from these basic elementary lessons about, like, they're I think ultimately animated by a deep inability to reconcile their death. That's why they're so obsessed with transhumanism and trying to live forever. I think their selfishness, the desires, the entire like intricate Gnostic sort of rituals that have been built up over centuries and millennia that ultimately are designed to persuade you that you are God. That you have to merge with evil to somehow be purged of the artificial, and to become true to yourself is to be like to merge with the shadow. Like, that's a very discombobulated, but I think it's the expression of ultimately the simple principle is the infantile state of the terrible two, brat. And I think that overall, in the longer scheme of things, I think we are destined to find ourselves as a species made in the image of a living, loving, reasonable creator, ultimately, with cultural institutions and dynamics that enliven and maintain that over the course of many generations. Not to say that I think we're ever going to be angels. That's the other thing. I do think that we always will have temptation. And so because we will always have temptation to be fooled by the senses and the flesh and fleshly impulses, we always have the mandate to relearn, rediscover, have challenges always. But I don't think, like you said, I think that the criminal element is ultimately something which shouldn't be rewarded, but should be something that will be done in shame and basements, away from positions of power over schools and political and military institutions. And eventually, I think that humanity will discipline ourselves to the point that we will learn that we're happier when we don't give into those things. But that'll take quite a long time. I mean,
so no time soon. But hey, if worse comes to worse and you ever run out of money or something, you, if anyone, could start a good death cult. You're a true expert. You have the knowledge. So anyways, friends, future potential death cult leader, but for now, very morally upright Canadian citizen and author of many books, Matt Ehret, thank you for being with us tonight. All right, Matt, where can people find out more about your work?
Oh, yeah, sure. They can buy my books on CanadianPatriot.org, or MatthewEhret.substack.com is sort of my bread and butter, which helped since there's been a lot of demonetization and stuff. So Substack saved my life. So there's free and paid. And then lastly, RisingTideFoundation.net. My wife and I, Cynthia, do a lot of documentaries with our friend Jason Dahl, and we've got new things coming out all the time. So that's RisingTideFoundation.net.
All right, friends, see you in the next episode.